Okay, so basically I have a short chronological poetic journey into the past 45 years of my life in about 22 minutes. So here we go. It's going to jump in and out of each of the storms, but there is certainly a colour theme following through it. The first poem is the prologue, and it's called Shiny Happy Person. I do not play chess. I grew bored of board games at an early age, as an only child who lived in his head when the fairies were magical and not mold. I was ultra shy as a kid and tried not to get too tied down into conversations that consisted of ruminations about who I wanted to become. Identity is difficult to determine on a blank canvas with sections already sinking below the surface.
You got me.
We had a cherry blossom tree in the front garden that rained pink petals onto lawns in late spring. I remember standing under them in a white suit, new holder of the Holy Spirit, and wondering if it would make a difference and what is the weight of a noose. I know who I am now. Since those quiet days under the fall of the cherry, when rainy days meant silly games indoors and the coming of the Spirit didn't have as much effect on my soul as it did on my wallet. I have tasted more too. Beauty, bounty, boys and bitches, sunsets and saints, gods and summers, serpents that tasted sweet and a certain kind of cute that gave venomous a bad name. I too have tasted the bitter side of who I can be, placed on a pedestal at a young age and left there to perish. I have since found my way down, but my knees still tremble at the sight of stairs. I've climbed down since then and managed to make my way out of the gutter while putting together my own idea of what it takes to embrace the darkness and shine like a fucking star. The first poem that I'm going to read from Eat the Storms, my debut collection from the Hedgehog Poetry Press, is called Shades of Blue, and it deals with the colour blue. I was adopted. It was a story I was told. It was a bedtime story that my parents told me about how they couldn't have a child. So they went off to the baby shop and they looked around in all the baskets and waited until they found the perfect child with the perfect smile, the perfect eyes, and brought me home. So I set off to school at an early age thinking I was so much better than everybody else. The bullies eventually beat that shit out of me. But this poem is about a whisper that I have only recently begun to listen to. I hear you calling in shades of blue. From the extremities of a distance my arms reach can never cover. I hear you calling in shades of blue. Your concern comes in currents across the continents when I consider creation and my position within it. I hear you calling in shades of blue. Only one born to know no origins can truly discern in these days that demand ties that have not been well tethered. When I came back to Ireland last year after being away for 23 years, I was reading the paper one Sunday morning and I found an article of a nun who had basically taken care of the babies in the convent where I was born. These were babies who were in between being given up and being reselected. She comes to cradle in a song. Gentle is the melody that folds back and continues familiar like breath new to baby. Uncertainty is not the stuff to serenade, but we can still sway despite the crosses we're born to bear. Blue can be breathtaking, like her song, like broken chains that still have their charms. She comes to cradle. That without a name can still be a son for a second. After separation, before selection, for the length of a song. And she sings it now, and it is familiar. While growing up, I lived in a house where there were 3 of us, but only 2 of us who knew how to love, how to accept love and give love. My father, unfortunately, had never really been taught the words to express how he felt. It's only later I realized that it wasn't his fault. Father ate all the flowers in the back garden because he couldn't swallow the promise of happiness blooming within the home he couldn't find his root within. Father left all of the flowers in the front garden, too proud for others to see him pulling from the soil everything he needed help with, but had never been taught the words for. Father liked to laugh first when others lost, so no one could hear his own loss tearing at him like weeds, twisting around the restraints he wore like those inside-out jumpers and tattered brown trousers he thought no one could see through. Father ate all the flowers in the shadows of the back garden and choked on a laugh that no one understood. While growing up and trying to come to terms with being adopted and I guess living in a house with somebody who for months and sometimes years never spoke to me, or my mother, I was also trying to come to terms with myself, with my own identity and my own sexuality. There can be earthquakes in little towns, far from tectonic plates, on little streets where we sat once, with the summer burning through our coolestness, trembling beneath attractions we didn't have the words to understand. Local boy and sandy-haired student of exchange. And I wanted to exchange, to uncover all that was growing curious. We sat once on a wall, in the kiss of youth's sunlight, in the stifling days of undulating adolescence and the growing tension of every question and that temptation. And I wanted nothing more than to touch that temptation. Unfolding between us, 2 boys beginning to join the colors that made blue, that never trembled longer than a month in the summer, when our legs occasionally touched like tectonic plates. There can be earthquakes in little towns. During all this time of trying to figure out what the fuck was going on, trying to figure out how to catch your breath, there was still coming from somewhere deep inside a resounding voice that said, keep going. This poem is called Rising, Scarlet Rising, and it's where the title of my book comes from. Eat the storms, mother said. Boil those beds of bitter blackness until the dream rips through the rain and translucent turns to trust. Even a diamond must ache in the darkness until compression can no longer conceal. Eat the storms, mother said. Slip out of shivering skin until touch recalls the sweet music of scarlet rising, caught below the lick of leaf, lost in the shadow of the shade. Even the petal must rise above the thorn before it can learn to dance in that light. Eat the storms, mother said, but I didn't hear it at first. It takes time to swallow the truth and to teach the tongue to taste that rain. Eventually, of course, I did get brave enough to go and taste what I could. Starting on the streets of Dublin, then Paris, London, Amsterdam, Paris again, before I came back to living in Ireland. This poem that appeared in the first issue of Farmadan Journal is called Tips for Less Cleaning Up After. I saw a jellyfish once, just beyond the tide, a tick away from time's reach where it couldn't sting. On the same beach once, though years later, we dipped our desires below the moonlight, and I lost your ring. A week later, I found your sting lay in other beds. I thought love was less abundant then, before I left. Before I found Paris and perished slightly under its pretensions, though I never shivered at the time or in the water. Not that time with the jellyfish, or later when that base metal slipped from my finger that would never become gold. I agree that I have worn many rings since then, though not one of them have ever drowned me. I always pick one size bigger so it slips off without leaving too much of a mark. Perhaps that's why I like salads. Chopped lettuce, some pulses and a breast of chicken. So much easier to clean up after. However, in France, as a rule, they never cut salad on their plate in public. At the age of 22, I arrived in Paris. It was 1997. I had very little money. I knew nobody. I had nowhere to live. I had no job. It was a rainy Sunday night, and below me were my bags with everything I owned in the world, and absolutely no hope. But youth is thankfully very forgiving, and eventually I found my way into a life in the city and to the jazz club de Leopolds. That haunting, that dance. We brushed soft shoe against hard surface. A pre-millennium stream of slow smoke, jazz notes under low lights at Lombard's, with its wine by the bottle so that we swayed to notes too complicated to catch hold of. We were saxophones, playing pink elephants, we were saxophones playing pink elephants beneath the Duke's darkness and the white lights of a blinding dawn. Prisoners to the poison, But we stepped across that floor already haunted, devouring desire before it was kissed by the ghost we promised each other not to leave. After Paris came London. I had moved to Paris on my own, and I moved to London for love. And something I've learned later on is that it's very much easier to move alone, because sometimes when you move for love, you end up living in somebody else's shadow. This next poem is based on this painting by Donnelly, Woman at the Window, or at least my reproduction of this painting by Donnelly. And it's called Donnelly Distractions. I was in London when we first met. You were on loan and I, something else. You were on a wall, looking out from shadow to sea, seeing cerulean, freshly dressed from a bed that had held you in place. Twist of the leg caught between a twitch of decision. There are moments to come in and others that let you leave. Tides learn of the waves' recoil only when it drops its guard upon the shore. You leant on that ledge, windows opening in, looking for a ladder to bring you out of that longing. I was in London when we first met and recognized your distraction. So close to the water that never succumbed to cessation while you had forgotten how to swim. Funny that. An islander growing a fear of drowning that no one was able to see on your face, looking out from within the frame that held you in place so tightly. That poem is going to be in my Stickleback, which is a micro collection coming out next month from the Hedgehog Poetry Press, which also features other paintings that I've stolen and copied from other great artists. After London came a decade of distractions in Paris, or in Amsterdam, and then I moved back to Paris. And while on holiday in South Korea, I spent this marvelous day on a beach in the island of Jeju. It looked like heaven. Cerulean skies, cerulean seas, white sand, absolutely epic. So the next morning I woke up early and I climbed a volcano to watch the sunrise. And instead I had my very first panic attack. So I guess that was the first time in my life where I realized that not all roads take you to where you intended to go to. Faith is fragile. Courage is not always conclusive. We don't command the waves or even comprehend the clouds. I tell you, this sand will be swept into the sea by nightfall. This baying breath of cyan beneath the stretch of those cerulean skies. This smooth, salt-licked land was forged from fire before we were born, when vultures had feathers instead of hands and knives, when volcanoes were all there was to fear. Faith is fragile. We cannot see what once was or what will come to be. We lie somewhere below the Calium, searching for security on a spot of shore before the tides return and we in turn become grains of sand that some being will one day look upon and try to see what is no longer there. It is ours to be the basalt or to be something better. And coming toward the end of the poetry section, this poem was recently featured in Blackbow's Deep Time magazine, and it sticks with that topic of panic attacks and coming back up for air. Diving is not that difficult. I've held on to trickier things over time than just this breath. It's not diving that's difficult, not that descent into darkness. It's the light that blinds, the sun that burns. Diving is not that difficult. We swim into silence. Current cuts the current. We make moments of a sunken stillness and surrender. There is nothing shocking in surrendering. It's not diving that's difficult, but climbing back up, breaking out, letting go of being held, of being weightless. Diving is not that difficult. Difficult is letting go of the fear that you'll have forgotten how to breathe. 2 poems left, and then I can go and die somewhere, happily, in alcohol. At 44, almost a year ago, I decided to move back to Ireland to stop running, and I guess come back and see what I left behind and also see how far away I got. I sat down upon your shore, those grazing greens of my childhood memory, displaced as tears rain down over the darkness of your sleeping fields. Once filled with a fine blood even famine could not blight. Now flooded with a sense of relief or regret. Too dark to tell, too changed to notice. Not knowing if you were crying because I have found my way home, or because I once found a home in another shore. The final poem that I'm going to read for you all this evening is also the final poem in the collection. It's called Colour is Waiting, and I guess it has taken me 45 years to realize that this journey is not about finding perfection, but about finding a balance between the light and everything that happens behind the closed doors. And still will come to lick the honey from the purple petals. And still will come to weed out the roots of worthlessness in gardens where others devour all that is beautiful. Time turns, and we in turn follow its path. Suns set, and the moon shows us its song. Hold hands and then release. Hold hope and then move on. We only own the moment. Mothers may still hand over their hearts to other mothers waiting to be wanted. Fathers may rise to be fearless or choke on the root of their own fear. But remember, black is only shadow. Come, catch the colour. Catch the life racing by in taxis, on trains, under starry nights, waiting for us to paint them. Behold how much there is to see, to learn from, to let go of. Eat the storms, she said. Eat the storms.